Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining our onX Hunt Deep Dive, talking about our tree and crop layers. We'll give it just a minute or two to let everyone get logged in and get situated. So while we're waiting, just a little bit of housekeeping. Your audio and video are turned off, so I can't see or hear you. Nobody else can, so no worries if you have noise in the background. If you do have questions, please drop them in the Q&A bar in the box. Should be down towards the bottom of your screen there. There's also a chat box option. Chat is good if you just want to let us know, where you're tuning in from or something like that. But questions do get lost in the chat, so use the Q&A. We don't have anybody answering questions live in the Q&A like we do on some of our classes. It's just me on this one. So I will get to your questions, but it'll be at the back half of the class here. This class is being recorded, so if you do want to go back and watch it again or show it to a friend, or you have to leave early and you want to go back and watch the part you missed, we'll send an email tomorrow with a link to our YouTube channel, or with a link to the YouTube video. And you can always go to our YouTube channel and go to the masterclass playlist to see any of our previous masterclasses. We started doing these like 2.5 years ago, so we've got quite a backlog of classes there. So if you're interested in other topics, check those out if you get a chance. And finally, we will be doing a giveaway at the end of this class. We're giving away some onX Hunt t-shirts, so you do have to be present in the class towards the end there to enter that giveaway. So let's kind of get into it here. Agenda for tonight is pretty straightforward. First, we're going to talk about the different tree layers that we have within the onX Hunt app. We'll go over some different areas. I'll kind of show some real-world examples of how you might use some of those specific layers. We'll do the same thing with crop layers. Those are a little bit more straightforward, I guess. The trees have a little bit more nuance. And then we'll get into the Q&A and the giveaway. So I'm going to stop sharing right now just so that I can pull up the map and we can start talking about tree and crop layers. So let me get flipped over here. All right, so I'm going to be spending the class in the onX Hunt web map. So this is, if you're not aware, this is available to you with your onX membership. You just go to our website, onxmaps.com. You can log in there. It's a little bit different, of course, than our mobile app, but the layers all work the same. The data is all the same. So if you're following along on your phone or on your tablet, things are going to look slightly different, but the same basic information still applies whether you're on mobile or on the web map. The reason I'm in web map here, partly it's just a little bit easier to show in the zoom here, but also because the tree and crop layers to me are most useful pre-hunt. They're most useful for scouting. I don't often use the tree and crop layers when I'm actually out hunting. Okay, by that point, I've kind of done the work and found an area and looked at that information. I might have marked waypoints or something like that to help me remember where a stand of oak trees is or something like that. But the bulk of the time I'm using those layers is on the web map here. So let's get into it. I'm here in Missoula, Montana. I'm going to go up into the upper left-hand kind of corner of the map here and click on Hunt Map Layers. Here I've got a handful of states listed. You might just have one, that's okay. But if I scroll down, we're going to be spending today's class in this folder here, trees, crops, and soil. If you're doing this on a mobile device, you just go into Hunt Map Layers in the lower left-hand corner, scroll down, they'll be in the same order as this, and open up the trees, crops, and soil there. So we have a handful of different layers within this collection here. We won't talk about every one of them today, but we are going to cover most of these. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to are these different sublayers. You'll notice this for a lot of these different layers. Each one of our tree and crop layers has the ability to kind of fine tune what you're looking at. So let's say I'm looking at coniferous trees. I'm in western Montana. That's mostly what we have here. The mountains are primarily, pine trees, ponderosa and lodgepole pines, and then fir and spruce trees. So if I get over to a forested region, I'm going to go into the wilderness here because it's a little bit easier to see with less roads and trails. And I'm going to turn on my coniferous tree distribution layer. You'll see it adds some coloration to my map. If I hover over that coloration with my cursor, it's going to tell me what the primary tree species is in those areas. So we have grouped species together. If I click into details, you can see those different sublayers and see how they're grouped. So we don't necessarily break it out by different types of pine trees. We just tell you, hey, these are pines. We don't break it down between white pine, red pine, lodgepole, ponderosa, etc. We have fir, hemlock, and spruce grouped together, juniper, larch, tamarack, longleaf pine, and other. So you can turn these on and off individually if you'd like. If you're only looking for pine trees, you can turn off all of your other sublayers. Most of the time, I just have these all turned on, especially the areas I hunt, primarily western Montana, northern Minnesota. We're going to be looking at pine and fir and spruce trees. There is quite a few larch and tamaracks around here as well. So that's another one I'm interested in. But each one of these sublayers is going to have a slightly different coloration. So that's how you can tell the difference between these. So as I zoom in, it does fade a little bit. So you might want to stay zoomed out a little bit to get a better picture of what the different species are here. All of this information comes to us via aerial imagery analysis. Okay, so it's done kind of via flyovers with cameras, and based on the coloration of the vegetation and the foliage, they're able to tell what the dominant tree species is in a given area. So each one of these, if you look kind of close, you can see there's these little squares. The smallest square is about 30 by 30 yards. So it's going to tell you in this 30 by 30 area, this is the dominant tree species. Does that mean there could be other types of trees there? Of course, right? It's not going to be, this is a 30-30 block of just pine. There might be something else mixed in there as well, giving you the most prevalent. Okay, so I can also turn on my deciduous. And if you see, not a whole lot of change for me in the wilderness area here in Montana. However, if I go down, let me find a better area here. This one might actually be tough around Missoula to find some deciduous trees. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to move over to Minnesota where I know there's a bit more of a variety. So if I move my map over to northern Minnesota, now I'm seeing aspen and birch, fir, hemlock, and spruce. I can double check to make sure I have all of these turned on. I do. If I zoom in a bit more, I start to get a little bit more detail in here. There's some elm ash, cottonwood. I would guess up in this area, it's probably not cottonwoods, it's probably ash or elm. A lot of aspen trees in northern Minnesota. And of course, you've got your evergreen trees there as well. So that's kind of how you turn them on. If you prefer to just take a look at deciduous versus coniferous, you're like, I don't care what kind of trees they are, I just want to know where the deciduous trees are, where the coniferous, that's a layer available to you as well. Personally, I don't use it as much as just turning on the coniferous and deciduous because I want to know what the actual species is, because that makes a difference for a lot of my hunting. If it doesn't matter to you, just use this one, where it just tells you, hey, these are deciduous trees, These are coniferous trees. This one here looks like it might be a kind of a big tamarack swamp or jack pine swamp up there. Okay, so that's kind of nuts and bolts how to turn them on and how that data is collected and what it looks like. I want to move down to Mississippi to talk about one of the more specialized layers here. So I picked a random area of Mississippi. I've never been to the state. I just looked for a large, chunk of public land. We're in I believe this is the DeSoto National Forest here. And this was an area I was looking at, pretending like I was going to maybe go deer hunting in here. And one of a deer's favorite foods are oak trees. So we have a specific acorn producing oaks layer in here. And so if I hover over that, it's going to tell me these are red oak trees. If you've deer hunted a lot, oaks and acorns, or if you're in the South, I think folks pronounce it acorn. More power to you, however you pronounce it. Those acorns are like, candy to deer. It doesn't matter how great of a food plot you might have planted. If the oaks are dropping, that's what deer are going to be eating. Now, these are red oaks, which are not as desirable typically as those white oak acorns are. The red oaks have more tannins. They're a little bit more bitter. So the white oaks are typically going to be, eaten first, red oaks later on. But that's still helpful because maybe I'm hunting later in the year. All the white oak acorns have been eaten by deer and turkeys, and pretty much everything likes eating acorns. I want to focus in on some red oaks because it's going to be later on in the year. And again, does that mean that it's only oaks in this area? No, not necessarily. There is some ground truthing that goes into this. I can also turn on my other layers, and now I can get a more complete picture. This is a lot of longleaf pine and other pines in here, as you might expect in a lot of areas of the South, a lot of those pine forests. But then as I'm closer to the water, to this little creek here, I'm getting some white oaks, I'm getting some red oaks, oak gum cypress, would guess that's mostly oak trees in here, okay? And we often get questions on the acorn producing oaks layer of, does that mean that it's producing acorns right now? Not necessarily. What this means is these are oak trees that are mature enough to produce acorns, right? Sometimes they have to be 10, 15, even older, depending on the species, before they'll really start producing acorns. And oak trees don't necessarily produce a bumper crop every year. I know my area where my family deer hunts, northern Minnesota last year, bumper acorn crop. It was really hard for the bear hunters in September to hunt bear because the oaks were really dropping. This year, the oaks weren't really dropping as much. The bear hunters had a lot more success. I would expect the deer hunters, it to have affected, those early season deer movement patterns compared to last year. So again, you do have to be a hunter. You do have to get boots on the ground to confirm, but at least there are oak trees in here. It's going to narrow it down for you, and hopefully you're going to be able to find some or even one good tree that's producing a bunch of acorns for you. So I'm going to turn that layer off right now. Actually, I'm going to turn them all off just to clear my map up. And I want to talk about our next specialty tree layer here, and that is thermal deer cover. So probably not as useful in the South, to be perfectly honest. This one was created more for hunters in the Northeast, the Great Lakes states, areas where those deer have to find warm cover during the winters to survive. So I, again, chose a random area, National Forest in Pennsylvania, and I'm going to turn on this thermal deer cover layer here, and it's going to highlight areas that have primarily evergreen trees. In this area, it's hemlocks, and a thick canopy cover. So these thermal deer areas are going to be especially useful later on in the year. Pennsylvania's got that crazy flintlock season that looks like a blast late in the year. I think that's in December, might be after Christmas. If it's a real cold year and there's a lot of snow, the deer a lot of times will start to yard up. I remember hunting, again, northern Minnesota, growing up. Some of the old timers would talk about deer yards and how the deer would just all kind of congregate together during the cold weather. And you'd be walking in the woods sometimes and you'd get into a real thick like clump of cedars or something, and the ground would just be almost look like a cattle pasture because there were so many deer in there feeding. They will congregate in those areas, because there might be less snow on the ground under those trees, and they're going to block the wind. And I've actually read studies that have shown in some of those thick coniferous evergreen areas, the actual air temperature can be a few degrees warmer because they just hold, they take that heat in from the sun and they hold it. It's insulating more than if it was, all maple trees, for example, and the leaves are gone. There's not a whole lot there to protect the deer from the wind and the snow. So that's what that thermal deer cover layer is for. It's October 17th right now. Probably not all that important to you at this point in time. Come December, that's a layer you're going to want to be looking at. So I'm going to turn that one back off. And I'm going to jump back over to where I was in Minnesota and talk about kind of another one of these specialty tree layers we have here. Northern Minnesota, pretty well known for grouse and woodcock hunting. And if you are a ruffed grouse hunter, one of the top things you're going to look for are aspen stands, especially young aspen stands. I'm going to take a drink of water here. I'm talking a lot already. So you're looking for typically aspen cuts, areas that have been logged. There's still quite a bit of logging in the Great Lakes states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan. So there is a lot of turnover in those aspen stands, in those aspen forests. When I turn this layer on, you're going to see this purplish coloration here. And of course, if I hover over it, it's telling me it's aspen. These are areas that are typically going to be within about 5 to 15 years old, meaning somewhere between 5 and 15 years ago, either a fire came through or a big windstorm came through and blew trees down, or most likely that area was logged. Grouse hunters are looking for that high stem density areas, some of that thicker cover. Grouse will eat those aspen buds, throughout the year. I think especially in the winter, they're useful for them. It's good cover in the spring a lot of times for brood rearing, protection from predators and things like that. Deer also will use these young aspen stands. That is another food source. Again, in the winter, you might consider combining your young aspen forest and your thermal deer cover layer if you're hunting in that area. That's part of the reason I picked this area, is because we've got a whole bunch of spruce here that butt right up to the aspen. Deer and grouse and a lot of animals that we hunt are animals of the edge. So one very powerful way to use these tree layers is to look for those edges. Look for areas where different colors come together. I once remember hearing something from the guys at the Hunting Public, if you're familiar with them. They said when they do scouting, they were looking at vegetation, just the aerial imagery, and looking for areas with a lot of different colors on the map, because that was areas with a lot of vegetation variety. So an area like this, where I have some elm ash cottonwood, aspen and birch, some spruce right here, it's going to provide cover for grouse and deer. It's going to provide food in the form of aspens. It's got kind of everything they need in close proximity. That was one of the other tips I remember hearing from guys growing up. Rainy day grouse hunting, we would always look for stands of balsam fir, because the grouse would get under there and they could kind of keep a little bit drier. So any place when I'm grouse hunting northern Minnesota and I can find young aspen stands budding up to evergreens, balsam or cedars or anything like that, that's a good spot. All right. So I know I went through that pretty fast, but that's kind of the ins and outs on these different tree species layers. Again, if you have questions on them, drop them in the Q&A, and I will do my best to answer all of those questions here after we talk about crops. All right, so maybe you're in an area of the country where there isn't a lot of trees, or you're not hunting a species that's really tree dependent. I'm gonna go here to Kansas, and we'll talk about some of the different crops, the different crop layers and how that works. So we picked 19 of the most wildlife, 19 of the crops that wildlife use or prefer. So we don't have, crops that like people eat. We don't have fields where lettuce is grown, or, a lot of like the Central Valley of California, tomatoes and lettuce and peppers and things like that. It's gonna be your big staple crops. And of course, it's gonna be region dependent. Corn, soybeans, alfalfa, wheat, all the way down to rice, sugar beets, canola, potatoes. Okay, so again, you can just turn on the ones you want if you'd like, or you can turn them all on at once. That was supposed to turn them all on, but it didn't because this is a live broadcast and one thing usually has to go wrong. So I'm gonna start turning these on, and much like the tree species, you're gonna start seeing the different colors show up. And again, on the web map here, all I have to do is hover my cursor over, and it's gonna tell me what was planted there. Now, it is important to note, this data is updated in about March of every year. So we got this data in March. So what is that? 6-7 months ago. That means this data is not from 2024. It's from 2023. There's just no real way to get that data in the present year. So they're still collecting it right now in a lot of places. I know a lot of places harvest has gone through or is going on right now, but they're still kind of aggregating all of that data. We'll get the 2024 data next February, March. So what that means is you do need to know the rotations in your area. So upper Midwest, actually a lot of places, corn and soybeans are the dominant crop, and those are typically rotated a lot of times every year. So if it says corn, I know it was corn last year, good chance it's not corn this year. It might be rotated with wheat. I was just out in eastern Montana, and I haven't spent a ton of time in eastern Montana. I don't know the agricultural practices there as well as I do in the Midwest. So I was looking at areas, I was primarily looking for pheasants, also some sharptails. People know pheasants love corn, pheasants love sorghum. This whole area, I bet you there's plenty of pheasants in here because there's plenty of food for them. But when I was in eastern Montana, they're not rotating corn with soybeans. What I found as I was out there ground truthing was if it said corn was planted last year, a lot of them were wheat this year. And then if it said wheat from last year, it was a cornfield this year. Not every time, but enough that as I was driving around, as I was scouting out new areas at night in the hotel room, I was saying, all right, these all say wheat fields. That's probably corn this year. Unfortunately, a lot of the corn was still standing in eastern Montana, hadn't come out yet, so I didn't do a whole lot of hunting in those areas. If you pheasant hunted much, trying to hunt pheasants and standing corn, extremely difficult, especially if you're one person like I was, just me and my dog. So everywhere is going to be a little bit different. Kansas, we can see we really have 4 or 5 different crops here. There's some fallow or idle crop ground. This might be, a lot of people just call it CRP, which is Conservation Reserve Programs, a government program that pays a rental rate to farmers to leave their fields idle. That's a program that's been around for 40 years or so now. winter wheat, sorghum, corn. If I go up to, say, Minnesota, corn and soybeans, some sugar beets. Okay. If I go down to the south, let's see what we find in Georgia. Not a whole lot of agriculture in this area. Some hay. Let me find a spot that's looks like it's got some more agriculture. There we go. So we've got cotton, peanuts, corn, millet. So again, it does take a little bit of know-how beforehand to know, all right, all these areas that were peanuts last year, I personally am not an expert in the crop rotation in this area of Georgia. I know peanuts are used similar to soybeans. They're nitrogen fixing. So they're often planted after a crop that is taking nitrogen out of the area. So it might be rotated with cotton. Some places you might have a 3-year rotation where they're rotating between 3 different crops. Western Montana, where I live and hunt the majority of the time, we don't have a ton of large scale like row crop agriculture, but there's a lot of alfalfa that's planted. Now, alfalfa is not rotated every year. If it was alfalfa last year, pretty good chance it's going to be alfalfa again this year, and pretty good chance 10 years from now it's still going to be alfalfa, because that's kind of what grows here. And they're not planting corn and soybeans, or certainly not peanuts or cotton this far north. So that's kind of the ins and outs of the crop layer as well. It's pretty straightforward as far as how you use it. You do have to know the rotations there. But again, super useful when you're doing some scouting. In a state like Kansas, a lot of times you can find some of these walk-in areas. Kansas is famous for the WIHA walk-in hunter access program. And you might be able to say, all right, what do I want to hunt? I'm hunting pheasants, I'm hunting prairie chickens, sharp-tailed grouse, I'm hunting deer, I'm hunting fields for geese or mallards or something. Take a look at what was planted before you drive out there and take a look. And be perfectly honest, when I was hunting pheasants last week in eastern Montana, I was using the crop layers to find a lot of those. In Montana, our walk-in areas are called block management areas, to find a lot of those block management areas that had crops planted, period, because a lot of them were cattle pasture. And not that there aren't pheasants in some of those pasture lands, but I was focusing in more on the areas that just had something planted, and going out there and doing the ground truthing as well. So that's going to conclude the presentation portion of the class tonight. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can pull up the Q&A, and we'll get into some of those. Oh, good question from John here. John asked, how do you tell what species it is on the mobile device? So on the web map here, you guys saw when I was hovering my cursor over the map, it was popping up for hemlock spruce or corn or soybeans. On a mobile device, you do have to tap on the area. So if it's a field and it's colored yellow, tap on it. It'll bring up a query card, and it'll probably have the landowner information first. You might have to scroll down a little bit. Then it'll tell you what the crop is. And it does become a lot easier the more you use these layers. So like I said, when I was in eastern Montana, it only really took me a day to know what the colors were in each area, to know, okay, this is winter wheat, this is alfalfa, this is corn, this is sorghum. Okay, so once you use it a little bit, it'll become second nature. You won't have to click on the color every time to tell what it is. Jamie asked, I'm wondering if it could be possible to have a different color for the white oak trees in the acorn producing layer. Here in southwest Mississippi, it is very hard to differentiate the white oak square from the other vegetation. Great suggestion, Jamie. That's not an option we have to customize right now, but that's something I can send along to the designers and the folks who control those colors. One thing you could do is use the topographic base map. Instead of using the satellite imagery, you might just flip to the topo, which will be kind of that white background with the elevation lines on it. That would more easily help those colors stand out. But I definitely hear you. It can be tough to tell against the background of the imagery. Garrett asks, in my area of Ohio, it seems there are way more oaks present than the layer shows. Is there a way to adjust this? At this time, there's not. We kind of take the data in as it comes to us. So we go by what that national data source sends to us. I have noticed that as well. We've got some oaks in our deer camp in northern Minnesota that don't necessarily show up. They're kind of sparse. They're the dominant tree in that area, but they're pretty widely spaced. So I think that's why it doesn't always pick up if it's kind of that oak savanna type area, but they're not super thick. It might not pick up in that 30 by 30, 30-yard square. But it's definitely a good question, something I will dig into, see if we can improve in the future. So Garrett asks, is it the previous year's crop that shows? Yep. So it's last year's crops. He was talking about a corn bean rotation. He said, meaning a corn bean rotation will often be incorrect. Not necessarily incorrect, it's just showing you what was planted last year. So in a lot of those areas in the upper Midwest, corn bean, it's every year. So if it said soybeans last year, not a guarantee, but I would feel pretty comfortable saying probably going to be corn this year and vice versa. Craig asks, I'm a new user. What does layers mean and how to use them? So Craig, it's a bit more of an involved answer than I can go into right now, but the short of it is layers are ways that you can customize the map with additional information. So we have hundreds of different layers and sublayers, everything from the private lands and public lands to the trees and crops like we're talking about here, to slope angle layers and precipitation radar layers and different things like that. I would recommend checking out, if you're brand new, next week we're doing an onX Hunt 101 masterclass. We do those every month. I'd recommend checking that out if you can attend it. Otherwise, our website has a lot of tutorials, as well as check out the onX Hunt Masterclass playlist on our YouTube channel. You can watch some of the old 101s. I think that'll be super helpful to you. Scott asks, can you hover over your map on your phone? You can't. I just touched on this earlier. To see what the layers are, you do have to tap on the map to bring up that information card along the bottom there. Michael asks, what resources do you use to learn the crops in rotations in your area, or maybe an area you've never been to? Sometimes I've just Googled it. There's a lot of information on there. If you look up, hey, what is commonly rotated with peanuts? Or what is rotated with sugar beets or rice? That I found good information on that for typing in, what is rotated with sugar beets in North Dakota, or what's rotated with canola in North Dakota. So that's one way to do it. I did give the example when I was upland bird hunting last weekend in eastern Montana. I was doing some ground truthing and taking a look, and I noticed there was a handful of fields. They were all wheat this year, and my layer said corn. So that tells me, all right, so at least in this area of eastern Montana, corn and wheat are the rotation. And I was seeing the opposite. So I was seeing the wheat fields, they were wheat this year, said corn last year, and vice versa. You might even try to contact like a state Department of Agriculture, either their website or just sending an email. They might be able to help you as well. Same thing with a DNR, Fish and Game office in a state. Might be worth just shooting an email off to them, see if they could point you in the right direction. Scott asked, does onX have separate maps for winter and summer leaf cover? So we do have an option for leaf-off imagery in select states right now, Scott. I believe we only have it for 15 states, all east of the Rockies, and it is an elite member feature, so you do have to have that elite membership to access that leaf-off imagery. But if you go into your base maps, where you can choose between satellite, hybrid, and topo, down below there will be an option for leaf-off imagery. We might not have it in your state. If we don't, there'll be a big kind of filter over your state that says no leaf-off imagery available. We do have it for, I believe the number's 15 states right now. Looking to add more. Not every state has it available, and some don't have it available at like the resolution we require, but we are looking to add additional states. Again, focusing primarily on the eastern half of the country where there's much more deciduous forests. Kevin asked, do you guys have your own model you use to classify the tree crop type from the aerial imagery? Or is that data processed and provided by whoever is getting the imagery? So we are not processing that data. The data comes to us from nationwide sources. So we use the data that they have. And we have found it to be more or less accurate. It's pretty good. Again, with the trees, it's a little bit tougher than the crops. The crops are a lot easier for them to determine. The trees, especially when you've got mixed forest, it can sometimes be a little bit difficult to tell what the predominant species is. But in my experience, it's pretty darn accurate in most cases. Bill, great question here. Is there historical crop information? Like, can you look back at previous years? There isn't right now, but I know we've talked about that, and I believe that is something we are working to put in there. So you would be able to go back. I think the first year we got crop data was for 2021. It's either 2020 or 2021, I believe. And so to be able to go back and see, all right, in 21 this was planted, in 22, 23, 24, that would also help be able to get down a sense of what the rotation is, especially as we get more years data. So to answer your question, Bill, not right now, hopefully something we can do in the future. Looks like Jacob just asked that same question. All right. John asked, I know it's not today's subject. Is there a way to integrate the onX Hunt app with a farming GPS? There's not, John. We don't really integrate with any other external GPSs. We are a smartphone, tablet, and computer-based app. Jamie asked, when you say a 30 by 30 square, are you referring to the size of the square on the map? Yeah, Jamie. So if you zoom in on, if you turn on one of the tree species layers, you'll see the smallest box, the smallest pixel that you could find on there is 30 by 30. Now, most of the time it's going to be multiple pixels grouped together. It'll be a larger blob. But if you do see one where it's just one lone square, that's 30 yards by 30 yards. Jonathan asked, plans to add leaf off for Michigan? I don't know exactly where, what imagery is all available for Michigan. If there's good leaf off imagery available that we can get for Michigan, we want to have it. Again, I don't know if there is leaf off imagery available, but if there is, you can bet Michigan is, what are they usually, second or third in the country, I think, for hunting license sales. So a lot of folks there that could make use of that leaf off imagery. So something we'd be interested in if it exists. Let's see. Jim said, we use one for pipeline/individual brush clearing. We look at landowners and thickness of brush. Is there a layer that lets us get close enough to view thickness? We don't really have like a vegetation thickness layer, Jim. I'm not aware if that data is really out there. I think that would be a little bit difficult to find on a mass scale because our tree species, it comes from analyzing that satellite imagery. So you can't really tell what that understory is, what the brush looks like by doing a flyover. But I could definitely see how that would be useful. Let's see, there's a few other questions in here that aren't specifically dealing with tree and crop. I've got a few more minutes here. Let's see, see what else we can talk about. Adam asked a question about South Dakota. It says here in South Dakota, there's a couple types of public hunting lands. CRP and walk-ins are the most typical, but there's also state game production land that is also open to the public to hunt on with ammo restrictions. But when I use the SD walk-ins layer, it doesn't show. The closest I see is SD government lands, but even then it doesn't show the areas as state game production land. Is there a way to get the classification added as a layer or at least labeled directly? Because government land is really generic, is not all government land is open to hunting like state game production land is. Let me open up my map here, Adam. We can take a peek at this one. I do have some experience hunting South Dakota, so I'm familiar with what you're talking about. So I am going to move my map. I'm going to turn on my South Dakota layers. Going to make sure I have the correct ones turned on. I'm just going to turn on everything, and then let's zoom in. I'm going to turn off my crop layers just to open this up a little bit. There we go. So I'm in South Dakota. We've got some walk-in areas. We've got a lot of the school trust lands. Let's see if I can find a game production area. That's a wildlife management area. God, I think there's some in this area. Because I know I've hunted a South Dakota game production area, and I know I've used onX to find it. So to answer your question, or not answer your question, but to kind of talk more about the government lands layer. So the government lands layer is not just showing land that's open to hunting. Okay, if I zoom out in South Dakota, we've got Badlands National Park. I'm not certain, but I don't believe there's a ton of hunting that goes on there, but it is still government lands. Similar, we've got, tribal land here, national grasslands. So the government lands layer is not telling you go hunting. This is open land. It's just telling you where government land is or where public land is. If I go up to the lake here, that's another wildlife management area. I know we have game production areas in here somewhere. I'm just not able to find them right now. This will be another wildlife management area. So to answer your question, Adam, the game production lands are included in the government lands layer. They're not in the walk-ins. Walk-ins are private lands that are enrolled in the walk-in program, so they will look like this. So if it's public, it's not in the walk-ins layer, it's in the government lands layer. Let's see, Stephen asked, do you use AI to analyze the satellite imagery? Not at this time, not that I'm aware of. Ben asked, why is leaf off important? So some folks, Ben, like to see what the land looks like without the leaves on. Sometimes they want to use it just to be able to easily tell, are these deciduous or coniferous trees? Of course, we have the layers for that, but some people prefer to just look at the satellite imagery. And also sometimes in areas when the leaves are off, you can get a sense for what the actual land looks like a little bit better. You can even see some deer trails or game trails in different areas. So that's why a lot of folks like that leaf-off imagery. It's been a pretty big request for us. Let's see, William asked, are there any plans to add more variety of oak trees? I don't know at this time right now, William. I don't know if that data is available to us, if it's broken down into like chinkapin oak, live oak, the different types. For right now, we've got it broken down into white and red and mixed. White and red are kind of the big families of oaks, and then there's different types of whites, different types of red oaks. So again, I don't know if our data source breaks it down that far, but I can definitely look into that and see and check with the folks that handle these layers and this data to see if that data is available, if we can break it out more. All right, so we are about at time here. I am going to drop the giveaway link in the chat here. Just give me one moment to do that. All right, so giveaway link is in the chat. I'm also going to turn chat off just for right now so that that link stays there and doesn't get lost. A lot of times as people type in there, that link can get lost. So that's there for you. You do have to enter by midnight tonight, and I will send an email out to the winners tomorrow, and we'll get your shirts shipped out to you. We're giving away some of these Topo t-shirts here. If the link doesn't work for you, we've heard from some customers that they're not able to click on it. Some phones have a funky setting where it won't let you open up the link from Zoom. You may have to copy and paste it. Otherwise, type this directly into a browser, this short bit.ly URL here, or if you got to write it down, and get entered, like I said, by midnight Mountain Time tonight. If you are interested in learning more about onX beyond what we've talked about today, some resources for you. Our website has some great tutorials if you're a little bit more of a reader. I know sometimes I retain information a little bit better if I read it versus watching Jack, say it to me via Zoom. I mentioned our YouTube channel. Our onX Hunt customer support team, should have mentioned them at the top of the hour. They are a phenomenal team, all US based. You can send us an email to help@onxmaps.com or give us a phone call. Numbers listed on the website. You can also Google it. Should be one of the first ones that show up. They will help with any sorts of questions that you have. And then, of course, future upcoming master classes. I mentioned earlier, next week we have an onX Hunt 101. So the 101s are, we're not going as in depth as these deep dives, but it covers more broadly kind of all the basics of the app, from layers to offline maps, marking waypoints, using the tracker, things like that. We already did questions and answers. So that is what I have for you today. I want to, again, thank everybody for joining us. And I do want to give a plug for the survey at the end of this class. Once I close the Zoom, you'll be taken to a survey. If you wouldn't mind just taking a few minutes, letting us know what you think of the class. And especially, there's a question in there. It's an optional question, so you don't have to answer it. But if you have ideas for future classes, whether it's a tactics-based, hey, I want to learn more about hunting white-tailed deer in the eastern United States, or I want to learn more about hunting quail in Arizona, or if it's, hey, I want to learn more about this specific feature of the onX Hunt app, let us know. That helps us as we're making our schedule for these classes and deciding what classes we're going to offer and all sorts of things like that. So again, thanks for joining us. It's the middle of October. I hope everybody's able to get outside and enjoy. It's the best time of year if you're a hunter. It feels crazy that it's already more than halfway through October. So we actually got some snow in the mountains around Missoula last night, and I think more to come tonight. So It's exciting. You can probably tell from me this next month is about as good as it gets. So if you haven't been out hunting, hopefully you've got a season that opens soon, and hopefully you're bringing onX along with you. And once again, thanks for joining us. Hope to see you on a future class.